debate between Democrat Pat Murphy and Republican Rod Blum. Live on KCRG 9.2 at Coe College Sinclair Auditorium. Hosted by KCRG and the Gazette.
Good evening, everyone. Election day is coming up fast. It's now less than 4 weeks away. And tonight we want you to get to know the two candidates who are running for Iowa's 1st congressional district seat and hear where they stand on many of the important issues that we face in our country today. The winner of this race will be filling the seat that Bruce Braley is vacating to run for the U.S. Senate. I'm Bruce Auney from KCRG TV9, and joining me to question the candidates tonight is Gazette political reporter James Lynch. And our format is going to be a little different from what we have had in many of the previous debates on KCRG through the years. Instead of formal opening statements tonight, I'll be chatting with each candidate one-on-one for just a couple of minutes to let you know a little bit more maybe about the personal side of the candidate. Then James and I will begin the questions. So let us begin now with our first candidate tonight. I'd like to introduce Pat Murphy, the Democratic candidate from Dubuque. Pat, if you could come out. Pat graduated from Dubuque Wahlert High School and also from Loras College. He has served in the Iowa House now since 1989 and also served as House Speaker from 2007 to 2011. And starting out tonight, just tell us a little bit about your family.
Well, just real quickly, I'm a native Dubuquer, born and raised and educated in Dubuque. The 9th of 10 kids. My mom and dad are Eileen and Larry Murphy. They both passed away. My dad 23 years ago, my mom just 4 years ago. But along with that, I'm married to Terry Gulick, who's somewhere here in the audience, right over there. And we have 4 of our own grown children. We have 9 grandchildren. And we've been calling Dubuque our home for the last 34 years. Well, it'll be 34 years in December.
What got you interested in politics in the first place?
The part that got me interested in politics is if you take a look at our family, there's been a lot of public service. From my dad serving in 3 years in World War II, to along with that, he was always very involved. He was involved with his labor union, his church. My mom was involved with school lunch programs. My sister worked for Cesar Chavez. I had a brother that was a state senator and the former mayor of Owine, as many of you are aware. So it seemed like a natural thing for me to be involved in public service. So when the opportunity presented itself here just 25 years ago, I took the opportunity to do it.
You've been in the legislature for 25 years. What are you proudest of, your accomplishments?
I think probably the first thing is raising the minimum wage. We did that that was the first bill we did when I was Speaker of the House. Probably some of the other things was expanding the Civil Rights Code to include the LGBT, doing the Little Bit Better Act, because women still aren't paid what men are in the workplace. And so those were 3 of the bills that we worked on the first year that I was in the legislature, or the Speaker. Mm-hmm. And then probably the last one would be defending the Constitution from changes back in 2009 when Iowa became just the 3rd state in the nation to guarantee marriage equality. Now there's 17 states.
Quickly, any surprises in the campaign so far?
I've been through way too many campaigns. I'm used to surprises.
All right. Thank you, Pat Murphy.
Thank you, Bruce.
Our next candidate tonight. Our next candidate, also from Dubuque, a graduate of Loras College, Rod Blum, will join us now. And he didn't stop just with Loras, because he went on to get a Master's of Business Administration at the University of Dubuque as well. And you've served in the past as Dubuque County GOP Chair. Yes. Tell us a little about your family.
I'm married to Karen, and we have 6 children, 5 biological children, and Malcolm Stewart, who's an African-American former basketball player of mine, that when he became an orphan, we took him into our hearts and into our family. And the youngest now is Sophie, who's 15 years old, and she's the only one we have left at home now. So we're close to being empty nesters.
You're a businessman. You've been very successful in business. Tell us a little bit about your career direction.
Well, first of all, my parents had 10th grade educations, both my mother and father. The first home I was born in had 2 rooms that had dirt floors. The oil burner was in the kitchen, and we raised chickens in the attic. And we didn't have much, but my parents did teach me the values of hard work and getting a good education and thrift. And I did, like as you probably said in my introduction, went to Loras College and the University of Dubuque, and then went to work on my version of the American dream. And I ended up in the software business, and eventually I was an owner and president of Eagle Point Software in Dubuque, and we grew from 5 employees to over 300 employees in just 5 years. That company went public on the NASDAQ Stock Exchange. As such, I was Iowa Entrepreneur of the Year in 1994, and I won Governor Branstad's Exporter of the Year award in 1995.
Okay, now you've been successful in business. Why do you want to get into politics?
Many people ask me that. My friends say, "Are you crazy?" Actually, I don't want to get into politics. I don't like politics, quite frankly. I'm doing this because I love the country, I love Americans, and I know we can do much better. I think the country's heading in the wrong direction, and I put myself forward as a candidate because I want to help change the direction of this country.
Well, we thank you for being here tonight. Well, now that you have heard a little from each candidate, it's about time to begin the questioning. Each candidate in the format tonight will have a minute to respond to each question, and then James and I are going to take a couple of minutes with some follow-up action and try to delve a little further into those initial responses, hopefully. We'll also be asking some questions that come from the audience here at Coe College tonight, and you at home, you can submit questions also if you're watching on the live chat, taking part in the live chat during the debate on KCRG TV 9. You can find a link for that on the home page. I guess it's time to begin, so why don't we begin with the first question, which is directed to Pat Murphy tonight. And talking to voters, which James and I do quite a bit of, I hear nothing but frustration and even disgust with what's happening in Washington today. Nobody really has anything good to say about either party. They don't seem optimistic about any improvement coming with the next Congress. Why should voters have any faith that you, as a member of Congress, would be able to do any better?
Well, I would point, first of all, to my 25 years of experience. The first part I would point out is I've worked in the legislature for the last 25 years, working with Republicans and Democrats across party lines to get things done. I think the best example of that is we passed a 1-cent sales tax then, before he became Speaker of the House, Christopher Rance and I worked on that bill because we had aging infrastructure issues here in the state of Iowa. We were able to get that bill passed, but along with that, we did some other things. I worked on a pharmaceutical co-op bill to help decrease the cost of prescription drugs for seniors. But along with that, the other part that I did too is I watched my sister die of cancer back in 2001, and I watched my brother-in-law discard a lot of drugs. I worked with the people across party lines to get a bill done that did a pharmaceutical repository. And the last thing I just want to add is, being here in Cedar Rapids tonight as Speaker of the House, I worked with Republicans across party lines to address flood issues back in 2009 when the budget was very tight after we'd been affected by a huge flood here. We were able to put money into the city of Cedar Rapids to address things FEMA and the Small Business Administration wouldn't address.
Thank you. Mr. Blum?
It's interesting hearing that from my opponent, because we were both in Des Moines a few months ago at a Community Bankers Association meeting, and Pat stood on the stage and said, "I've often been accused of being one of the most partisan members of the Iowa delegation in Des Moines," and he said, and I'm sure that is true. So that's an interesting comment. I do agree with you, Bruce, that people are sick and tired of politics as usual. They're sick and tired of career politicians in Washington, D.C. It's one of the reasons I'm running. The hyper-partisanship has got to stop in Washington, D.C. The two sides won't even talk to each other anymore. And I've always been one that said, I will reach across the aisle. Nancy Pelosi, she's a pretty liberal Democrat in Washington. If she's got a good idea on how to get this economy going, how to help Eastern Iowans put more money in their paycheck, I am on board with that idea. The Republican Party does not have a corner on all good ideas, and neither does the Democrat Party. We need to work together to move this country forward.
Okay, now you're each, of course, hoping to win the election. You must have something already set in your minds about what would be the top issues on your agenda when you get into your office in Washington. Well, start with you, Mr. Blum.
Yes, the top issue that I have is the same issue that I have heard for the last 18 months as I've been campaigning in eastern Iowa, and that is jobs in the economy. That would absolutely be my top issue. The middle class, their income has gone down the last 7 years. Their household net worth has gone down the last 7 years. At the same time, prices, as we all know, have increased, some of them very, very rapidly. So the middle class is stressed. There's no doubt about it. The middle class does not want more government dependency. They don't want another handout. They don't want more food stamps. What they want are good paying jobs.
Now, Mr. Murphy, one of the Blum commercials shows you on the floor of the Iowa House in, I believe it was 2011, when you were responding to actions by the Republican majority in shutting down the switchboard during, I believe it was a debate over collective bargaining, cutting off collective bargaining for state workers. You had an angry outburst. Iowa voters would look at that and think that this is something that shows you're not able to work with the opposite party. How do you respond to that?
Actually, I would argue different. I'm passionate. I'm passionate about protecting the middle class. And it was rather ironic that I talked to legislators and lobbyists who'd been there since the 1970s. They'd never seen the switchboard shut down in 40 years. They were cutting out the ability for people to call and grievance their legislators so they could lobby for them not to do that bill. Republicans chose to shut the switchboard off on the day it was closed down, and I decided to hold the majority party to hold their feet to the fire, because it was wrong for them not to listen to the people of the state of Iowa when they were covering such a contentious bill that they wouldn't even hear from their constituents. So I think it's more about passion and knowing that I'm fighting for the middle class and working to make sure that people have their rights within the workplace.
Let's move on to James's question to Rod Blum.
Mr. Blum, you've insisted that immigration reform needs to start with fully securing the border. What does that mean? Does that mean zero tolerance for illegal immigrants crossing the border into the United States?
First of all, on the immigration issue, as a Christian, I'd like to say I have tremendous empathy for any person, their families, when they put themselves in harm's way to come across the border, sometimes with some very unsavory types of people bringing them across the border. I have tremendous empathy for that, to try to provide for their families. That being said, we are a nation of laws. And every single person I have spoken to in the last 18 months in eastern Iowa says we've got to secure the border. It was promised to us in 1986 when Ronald Reagan signed the Amnesty Act, and it didn't, the government didn't follow through. It was promised to us again in a specific bill in 2006 when President Bush was in office, and once again the federal government didn't follow through. We need to secure the border. Why would we trust the federal government now after they've let us down twice? And not only is this an illegal immigration issue, which drives down wages for our working middle-class families, but it's also a security issue, particularly with ISIS. I'm so afraid somebody from ISIS is going to end up walking either a suitcase nuclear bomb or a biological weapon across that border. So yes, I think we do need to secure the border.
Is that just a way of avoiding getting to step 2 of immigration reform if you insist on securing the border?
After we secure the border, then we need to fix our broken immigration reform system.
But how will we know if we've secured the border?
We need Pat Murphy to respond first, too.
Okay, sure. Pat, you've been a consistent voice for immigration reform, and recently you talked about the need to create a pathway to citizenship and amnesty so that immigrants coming into this country today don't become the next generation of terrorists. What's the basis for your comment?
James, that's not what I said. First of all, what I said was we have children coming to the border, and if children are coming to the border, the world is watching, and these aren't children from Mexico, they're coming from Central America. And more importantly, it's about making sure this country's always taken pride in making sure that we give kids a good education, have adult supervision, making sure that they have foster care or parents. That's what we need to focus on. And it's expected that most of the children at the border will be given refugee status. The world's watching. The United States has always been a country that's taken care of their children. The world's watching. We need to continue that. More importantly, though, I will just add, I would have supported the Senate bill that was a compromise bill between Republicans and Democrats. It did two things. It increased border security by 20,000 border guards, but more importantly, it also addressed that they had to start self-reporting if they're undocumented so that they could get in line to document via citizenship. I believe we should go further, and that means community service, military service, other things so that they become more involved in the communities.
Thank you. Mr. Blum, would you support that Senate immigration reform bill?
Well, we need to fix the broken immigration system, for starters. H-1B visas is a classic example. I have a high-tech software company. We have structural engineers from Nepal that are with our company, master's degree in structural engineering. And it is amazing, the paperwork and the amount of money, and they have to hire lawyers to try to get through this myriad, this bizarre and Byzantine system of immigration rules and laws that we have. That needs to be reformed. I believe the number is 45% of the people currently here illegally are here on expired work visas. So that entire system needs to be looked at and reformed as well. Once we reform the system, now we have to deal with the people that have been here, that are here already. And that estimate is up to as high as 25 to 30 million people. And I've heard all kinds of ideas. I've heard deport them. I've heard crack down on their employers and get tough on the employers that employ them knowingly. I've also heard let's have families sponsor them and help teaching them English and make sure they're not using our welfare system and make sure that they're following our laws and obeying our laws. And I've also heard where they pay a fine, they learn English, they get in the back of the line for legal immigration. But in no uncertain terms am I for amnesty.
But the Senate bill, could you support that?
I'll just go back to what I said. We need to reform this broken immigration system.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to ask Pat Murphy, what do you do with the illegals who are already here in the country?
Well, that's why I think this is a very important issue for the United States to address. First of all, if you watch what happened in Postville, we spent over $200,000 for each undocumented worker that we deported. So I think it's more important that we can't afford to do deportation of what's estimated to be 13 million undocumented workers in the United States. So what I would recommend is that we do what the Senate bill does, which is you have to self-report, you have to get in line, and you have to go through the system. And I think the other part that we should add to that bill is add the fact that they have to do military or community service. I think those are parts that we need to do on immigration reform.
Representative Murphy, the rioting in August that followed the police shooting of an unarmed teenager in Ferguson, Missouri, led to some people, including even President Obama, calling for demilitarization of local police forces. Specifically, they want to end the federal program that provides local law enforcement agencies with surplus military vehicles, equipment, and even weapons. And we even have some of these MRAPs, or mine-resistant vehicles here in Iowa. How would you respond to efforts in Congress to go through with this and demilitarize local police?
Well, before we demilitarize, you have to understand why they started using military equipment, and that dates back to the 1960s and the 1970s with the war movement due to Vietnam. And so I think more importantly, it's about making sure that local law enforcement has the tools they need, but at the same time not having issues where you have military vehicles being used for purposes that they maybe should not be done. So it's what I think we need to focus on is giving the tools through the federal government, quite frankly, probably putting more cops on the street and showing how those pieces of equipment should be used and when they should be used. But I don't think it's something that we should just totally get rid of completely. And that's the part that I think people forget. This was something that was done in the 60s and the 70s. And the part that's wrong with the federal legislation is you have to use the equipment or you can forfeit it. If communities need it, they're going to need this hopefully rarely. So the goal needs to be that you make sure that you have the resources for them for when they need it, but not put requirements on how frequently they use it.
Mr. Blum, would you respond?
I don't think the military police forces need to be looking like Army SWAT teams. And I have the utmost respect for our police officers, and I know their job is extremely, extremely difficult. But we're seeing I'm seeing, and the voters in eastern Iowa are seeing a change in attitude almost, if you will, of our police departments across Iowa and across the nation. And there's been lots of videos that we've seen lately of police brutality or close to brutality, and shooting first, asking questions later. And I'm kind of old-fashioned, but I believe in civil liberties, and I believe in freedoms, and I believe in due process, and I think you're innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. So I think it's beyond the pale. They do not need these military vehicles. And, but I would leave that up once again to the states, to the municipalities, to the cities to decide if they want to purchase them or not.
Isn't this a situation often, though, with gangs, drug situations, where the police have to say, my gun has to be bigger than your gun?
I guess I don't believe so. I think the police, they have enough firepower, and they had it 10, 15 years ago before we had what now looks like a CIA covert operation.
Anything more?
We can go to the next question.
Okay.
Okay.
We will. We'll go to a question about minimum wage. Mr. Blum, what's the downside of raising the minimum wage? Who would it hurt? Would it help anyone?
First of all, I'm a believer in the 10th Amendment, which is states' rights. And for example, the state of California's cost of living is vastly different than the state of Iowa's cost of living. So I don't believe in a one-size-fits-all when it comes to the minimum wage. I believe each state should set their own minimum wage. And many states have higher minimum wages than the federal minimum wage. The Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, it's nonpartisan, projects if we would raise the minimum wage federally to $10.10 as proposed, it would cost 500,000 jobs. Now, I don't want 500,000 jobs lost in this fragile economy, this jobless recovery that we have going on in this nation at present. So I don't like that trade-off. I like the kind of minimum wage, James, that they have in North Dakota. To start at McDonald's in North Dakota is $15 an hour, and to start at Walmart's $18 an hour. And why is that? Because North Dakota's economy is booming. And a lot of people that earn the minimum wage are not in low-income families. In fact, the majority of them are not in low-income families. And if we truly want to help low-income families, I think we should look at the earned income tax credit as opposed to the minimum wage.
Representative Murphy, you were part of raising the minimum wage when you were Speaker of the House. Now you're advocating $10.10 an hour. Do you want that phased in over time? Do you want it indexed? How would you propose to proceed with that?
Thank you, James. The bill I introduced in the Iowa House this year proposed raising the minimum wage from $7.25 at its current level, and it would raise it $1 a year for the next 2 years, and then on 2016, I think, is the year that it goes to $10.10 an hour. And here's why it's so important. If you want to live the American dream, if you want to work hard and play by the rules and get ahead, you can't do it at $7.25 an hour. You've got to make, and here's the other part. If you raise it to $10.10 an hour, 28,000 Iowa families go off of food stamps, and that's what it's about, making people self-sufficient, making them take pride in their work, and giving them a good job. It doesn't help if a person's making $7.25 an hour, but yet his children receive free and reduced lunches at school, end up qualifying for Medicaid, and end up qualifying for food stamps. It's more about making sure that that middle class grows, especially for the people at the lower end of the middle class. I'd just
like to say, a husband and wife doesn't typically sit around their table and when they're talking about their 10-year-old saying, you know what, I hope Susie has a $10.10 minimum wage someday. I think these types of issues are really issues that the Democrats want to be talking about, because they don't want to be talking about, Pat, how bad this economy is and how there are fewer people working today than when Barack Obama took office, how the middle class's family income's down, how the middle class family's net worth is down at the same time prices are up. So you can't legislate prosperity. Now, a career politician, of course, would think that you can, and the government can legislate prosperity, but it can't. It can't. It's created in the private sector, and we need to unleash the private sector. We need to get off of their back and out of their pocketbooks and let them grow.
Let Mr. Murphy respond to that.
I would just, the first part I would just say to that is, the recession was started in the previous administration, and I think this is a problem we're having today. We need to make sure.
People,
please. We've got to make sure that we, first of all, address the issues that caused the recession. Some of them were derivatives and risky banking investments on the East and West Coast. That's what caused the huge bubble in our economy. So we've got to address those issues. There has been 6 years of solid growth under the president, and we've had an increase of jobs. The unemployment rate's the lowest it's been in 6 years, and it's under 6%. We need to continue to focus on what we need to do to put Americans back to work, which is focusing on education, making sure kids get the job trainings they need, especially in the areas of science, technology, engineering, and math. That's what we need to focus on. And we need to make sure that we have good employers that respect people and don't violate their overtime laws because they choose not to pay them. We need to make sure that companies treat people... That's enough. We need to make sure that we have employers that treat people well and play by the rules.
Can I address that?
Mr. Blum, I just liked what Mr. Murphy said there at one point was, wouldn't the minimum wage, raising it, be an effective way of getting more people off of public assistance?
It'd be 500,000 people, though, are going to be put back on public assistance because that's how many jobs it's going to cost.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the state of Iowa should have a vote on that, and the governor and the legislature should take up minimum wage. State by state, we should do that. I just don't like the federal government one-size-fits-all mentality from Washington, D.C.
Everyone in the audience, please, the applause and the cheering takes away from the time that they have to respond to questions, all right? So you'll have plenty of time at the end.
Can I address his...
Well... Yes, and then you can come back at it. This is a big issue. So.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the overtime stab you took at me. What happened is we had over 100 college-degreed salespeople, okay, who were paid base salary, bonus, commission. They were paid profit sharing and stock options. Okay, college degrees, highly skilled, selling high-tech software. The Federal Department of Labor in a routine audit comes into our company and based, Pat, on a 1938 labor law. Now, I think things have changed since 1938 in definition of jobs as well. Said, are these people punching a clock? We said, punching a clock? They have college degrees. Why would they be punching a clock? He said, well, according to 1938 labor law, they should be punching a clock. And so we asked the salespeople, do you want to be punching a clock? They said, no, we don't want to punch a clock. So the Department of Labor said, either we can estimate what you owe them in back pay, or we can go to court, because that's the way it is. Okay. And I said...
We have to move on. You want to...
Well, the only part I'll add to that is, first of all, the Fair Labor Standards Act was passed in 1933, and I just have one thing to say to the audience and the people at home. It's the law of the land. Employers need to respect their workers, and people need to be able to work and get ahead, and they need to have employers that will treat them well and play by the rules. And when we send somebody to Congress, we need somebody that will play by the rules.
All right, moving on.
Moving right along here, Representative Murphy, you heard Mr. Blum accuse you of being a career politician. You've talked about being in the legislature 25 years. Mm-hmm. Have you been there so long, too long, that you've become one of them and rather than one of us?
At $25,000 a year, this is not a job I'm getting rich at. I still live in Dubuque. I live on Grandview. We still live in the home that my wife grew up in. I feel like I'm very attached to the Dubuque community. Our kids have went to school there. They've gotten their education there. Two of our three children that went to college went to Loras and to Clark University. Our other son went to UNI at Waterloo. So I feel like I'm very connected to the community, and quite frankly, it's important to make sure that you have somebody with middle-class values. My wife's been a nurse for the last 34 years, and I think, sort of are typical of what the average family is in Dubuque, and I think that makes me very qualified because I've been in contact with people on a regular basis over the last 25 years, not just in Dubuque, but actually around the state. When I was Speaker of the House and Cedar Rapids had the flood here, we made sure that we funded programs that FEMA and the Small Business Administration wouldn't direct, and that, I think, puts me more in connection with people because I knew that there was going to be problems that they wouldn't address. We tried to address those immediately.
Mr. Blum? Mm-hmm. Representative Murphy has a track record voters can judge him on. How do voters judge you and make a judgment on what you might do as a congressman?
I think voters are probably happy I don't have a track record. I don't have a track record that Speaker Murphy had when he was Speaker of the highest state unemployment rate we had in the last 25 years at the time. I don't have a track record ringing up $1 billion state deficit called a spending gap when he was Speaker of the Iowa House, and I don't have a track record on continually growing government spending. So I think people are probably happy I don't have that track record.
Thank you.
We have this is to Pat Murphy. I'm losing track here. Fascinating. We have simply a frightening situation in the Middle East right now with the so-called Islamic State holding huge areas of Iraq and Syria. They're terrorizing and killing people. They control even other Muslims. The Obama administration has formed a coalition to go after ISIS, and President Obama has told the nation that there will be no U.S. combat forces on the ground there. What do you feel is the correct policy that we should be following in handling this problem of ISIS and other terrorist threats as well?
Bruce, that's a very good question. I think, first of all, neither one of us are elected, so we don't get updates on the national security, but I do think there are things that we need to address here. I support the President in the proposals he has so far, but I think we do have to look at our history and why we're there. And I think most importantly, if I become a member of Congress, I'm going to make sure that before I ever make a commitment to put troops into combat, that we make sure that we have all the information. If you remember back to 2001 and 2002, we thought there were terrorists in Iraq. Then they said it was weapons of mass destruction, and then now we have a really big problem on our hands. So we need to remember what our history was. We need to make sure that we hold the military and the people that are in charge of our national security to have accurate information. If I don't have accurate information, I'm not going to vote to put our troops in the ground, and I will not do that now. And I think lastly, we need to make sure we take care of troops when they come home. What's going on now with the VA, and along with that, the fact that we aren't treating our troops with PTSD and getting the services we need to address. And that means money for those programs.
Mr. Blum, what do you think we should be doing against
I think
ISIS?
this administration's foreign policy can be summed up in one sentence, and that is our allies don't respect us anymore, and our enemies do not fear us anymore. The reason there is an ISIS, they filled the vacuum that was left when we pulled out of our troops, our 20,000 remaining troops, out of Iraq. I think that was the first mistake. We should not have done it, particularly at this time. Secondly, Barack Obama and the administration were very supportive of the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring has not played out well in any of those countries. In fact, I would say it has led to the total destabilization of the Middle East. And the ISIS, well, let me give you an example of how confusing this can be, and how we're arming the rebels in Syria. And the rebels are fighting against ISIS. The rebels are also fighting against Bashar Assad's army. Assad is not fighting against ISIS until recently, when ISIS turned on Assad's regime army. So now you're sitting here going, this is confusing. I agree, it is very confusing. That's why we need to beef up the CIA covert operations. We need to have eyeballs on the ground in the Middle East, because we have to remember, whoever is our ally today, whoever we're arming today, especially in the Middle East, tomorrow could be our enemy, and could be using our own weapons to harm or kill one of our nation's finest.
Are we going to get to a situation, though, where U.S. troops are going to be in combat situations again over there?
That's a great question. I agree with Pat. We're not privy to those briefings every day. Very well could be. Now, if I'm a member of Congress, call me old-fashioned, I believe that Congress should approve wars, and they should have a vote on it. It shouldn't be at the sole discretion of the President of the United States. And the litmus test I will use is, if my 15-year-old daughter Sophie had to go be in the front lines of that war, would I still vote for that war? Because it's easy to send other people's children to die in foreign lands.
Is it the U.S. role? Should we be policing the world, even beyond the Middle East?
Well, Bruce, I think that's a great question, but I still think, quite frankly, we should not be involved in foreign countries, especially under these circumstances where we're expected to be the world police. I think more importantly, we need to, one, get more information, but two, it needs to be a solution that's a Middle East solution, that one that the Sunnis, the Shiites, and the Kurds will reach an agreement instead of us being the country that's going to try to have that occur. We thought we were going to give them free elections, and they did, but it hasn't worked very well. And there's a lot of people in those countries that are not willing to fight for their freedom. But more importantly, you take a look at some of the people that are in the region. President Assad is a ruthless dictator. A year ago, he was actually gassing his own people. We've got to start looking at the people that are there, and I think one thing that Rod and I agree on is When General Petraeus was giving money and arms to rebels in Iraq, those weapons are now going to be used if we were to send troops over there against us. That's why we've got to start thinking much better on long-term strategy throughout the world, and especially in the Middle East.
Today we learned of the death of the first person to be diagnosed with the Ebola virus here in the U.S., but the disease itself is plaguing West Africa, not the United States. With that in mind, how much of a threat to our country is the Ebola virus? And if it's a serious threat, what should the U.S. do to protect people here, ban flights from those affected countries, tighter restrictions on people from those countries entering the United States, screenings at airports? And I believe this question goes to Mr. Blum.
I agree with Dr. Ben. Well, first of all, to answer your question, James, I don't think anyone in this country knows what kind of a threat this is going to be to us. If Ebola would mutate and become transferable via air, being airborne, the virus, now we have a serious problem on our hands. It's something that could throw our economy into a serious recession, if not depression, if it got bad enough. Dr. Ben Carson, I thought, had a great solution for this, and he said we need to isolate the disease at the point of origin, meaning most of it came originally, at least, from Liberia, Africa, and a few other African nations. We need to isolate it there. We obviously want to reach out and help the people that have contacted the virus, but we should fly there and try to keep it in Africa as opposed to importing it to the United States of America. So I agree with that. And the things you mentioned, whether it's screening at airports or it's no flying from or to certain countries, all, I guess, would have to be on the table, depending if this thing continues to spread.
Representative Murphy, we've sent troops to Africa to help help medical personnel there, treat people who are suffering from Ebola. How much more should we be doing? And should it be in Africa, or should we be tightening the restrictions here?
James, it's a good question. First of all, I'll just say this. The goal should have been to try to contain it in West Africa, but that failed. And quite frankly, we need to look at what we're doing in this country, especially when it comes to the CDC. We have cut their budget this past year, roughly from about $6.4 billion down to $5.8 billion. That's almost a 10% cut in their budget. We've got to make sure that they have, the equipment and the facilities and the equipment to help local public health officials to contain this. And quite frankly, one of the other things that we need to continue to focus on is making sure that we can work with other countries to contain these issues within their country so they don't spread. But more importantly, when we do have these problems here in the United States, we need to make sure that they have the tools they need. And when you're cutting the Center for Disease Control by 10%, I don't think you're actually making it harder for them. So I think one of the things we need to do is when we're talking less government, remember less government might be to our detriment, especially when we're talking public health.
I am, for the first time in public, admitting that I have now reached the age where I am eligible for Social Security and Medicare.
Well, you don't look it.
Well, thank you. The trustees say that Social Security should be able to pay full benefits till somewhere between 2028 and 2041, and I'm hoping it's the latter. They say Medicare should be good until 2030, but those years are not that far away, and Congress has to act on this. We hear year after year after year that something is going to be done and nothing ever takes place. What are your solutions? We hear about raising the retirement age. We hear about eliminating the payroll tax cap, which is up to $117,000 this year, means testing Social Security recipients. Representative Murphy, what do we do?
Well, first of all, I'll tell you right now, I would keep Social Security the way it is. I would not raise the retirement age. Medicare and Medicaid should stay as a program that's operated by the federal government. The way we take care of the Medicaid and Social Security is by making sure every American has a good job. Because they pay taxes, that tax goes into the Medicare, into the Social Security fund, and it makes it solvent for a longer period of time. If you remember when Bill Clinton was in office in the late 90s and the economy was growing great, Social Security was solvent until the year 2073. Now it's only solvent to roughly the year I'm hearing is 2037. So we need to make sure that this program, it's an earned benefit that Americans have paid into. We need to make sure that earned benefit's there for every American, and not just for your generation, Bruce, or maybe my generation, but for my children's generation and my grandchildren as well. So we need to make sure that focus is there. Unlike my opponent, who has actually talked about, with the Des Moines Register in May of this year, of raising the age or putting it on Wall Street in articles that he's written, or on Medicare and Medicaid, voucherizing those programs. I will never do that. Those are issues that I'll never have any compromise on.
Mr. Blum, your response, please.
First of all, this Social Security, I think it's 2033, but we're close on when it's going to go bankrupt. In addition to being good policy, it's very personal with me. My 84-year-old mother, Celeste, died in March of this year, and she was on Social Security for 20-plus years. And if she didn't have family, she didn't have Social Security, she would have been in total poverty. So this is a program that I think we need to preserve and protect. Now, there's one of the things that's very frustrating about campaigning, very frustrating about politics, is the left, or the Democrats, love to demagogue anybody, any Republican that mentions anything that they want to do to try to solve the Social Security crisis. I think it needs to be done in a bipartisan way, because it's a big thing. Okay, Obamacare was passed without a single Republican vote. It should have been bipartisan. It would have been a much better bill. In a bipartisan way, Democrats talk about lifting the income cap, as you said. They talk about means testing the benefits. Our side typically talks about raising the retirement age and giving young people a chance to invest a portion of their earnings in something that's private that they own. I think a combination of those would be best. I think we ought to debate it, Republicans and Democrats in Congress, in an open and transparent way, and let's do maybe a little bit of each, and we would be able to protect this fund for the next 50 years. But we wouldn't be having this conversation if career politicians hadn't spent every cent that was supposed to be put in a trust fund over the last 60 years.
Is this something? I pay a lot of attention to Congress, and we hear issues that the leadership is presenting such and such a position on this. The leadership is presenting the bill, and I often wonder, what are the people, the other members of Congress doing while the leadership is putting all this together? Is this something that you, as a new congressman, can get together with other people in the House, Republicans and Democrats, and really start pushing for changes in reforming Social Security and Medicare? Representative.
Bruce, I make myself clear. I'm not reforming Social Security. We could raise the cap right now over $117,000 and make this solvent for 20, 30, 75 years if we did that. More importantly, if we have a better economy, which it is improving, more people go to work, more people pay into the fund, and that makes it solvent for a longer period of time. Same thing is true with Medicare. That's why, and these are three programs that I want to remind everybody of. Public television, sorry, it's not KCRG. They just did a very good program on the creation of Social Security under FDR. Republicans have been opposed to that program for 80 years. And with Medicare and Medicaid, since Lyndon Johnson created it, most Republicans have been opposed to it, including most of them voting against it in 1965. This is a huge difference between the two parties, and those are programs that I'm going to protect and do everything I can to keep them the way they are today and to make them more solvent for the future.
Is this a #1 agenda item for you when you get into the U.S. House if you win this election?
My #1 agenda item is improving the economy, and I agree with Pat that if we had another 11 million taxpayers today, that would help the Social Security fund. But if we had a Ronald Reagan recovery, we would have another 11 million more jobs. Take-home pay would be $1,000 a month in everyone's pocket. But these are failed economic policies, and this is one of the reasons that the Social Security Trust Fund is having trouble.
Okay, I have to move into something else that I know is probably going to bring up a little disagreement. There's a little thing in the country we have called the Affordable Care Act. Mr. Blum, you have said you would work to repeal Obamacare. First of all, that is not going to happen. The Republicans, even if you win control of the Senate and keep control of the House, you still have, say it's a basketball game, no matter what offense you put out there, you have one guy who's up there blocking all the shots. Why not work with Democrats on changing this law and improving this law? This is something like Mr. Murphy said, Republicans opposed Social Security and Medicare from the beginning, and why not work at improving this now?
Yes, I agree with you. It's not going to be repealed as long as Barack Obama is president. That's just not going to happen. So for the next 2 years, certainly we do need to work to make it better. If we look at the overall issue of health care, though, Everyone I've talked to in the last 18 months in the campaign trail feels that our health care in the United States, the quality of it is amazing. It's the best in the world, which I would agree with. But they also say the cost has increased too much for the average working family to be able to afford. Agree with that as well. So now, how do we not throw the baby out with the bathwater? How do we keep the quality of a product, health care, high, the best in the world, and bring the cost down? There's two basic choices. My opponent, which is let's socialize health care or medicine, have the government take it over. And I asked people for the last year and a half in the campaign trail, give me one example when the federal government has ever lowered the cost of any product. Not only have I never gotten a response, that has turned into a laugh line. So I would love to see a combination of the government being the financier and the private sector being the provider. Now we have the best of both worlds in health care. So I think we need to take it piece by piece in an open and transparent debate and vote on things individually. The increased prices, it's like death by 1,000 cuts. There's no one reason that health care is so expensive. So we need to address these things like insurance companies selling across state lines, etc.
Representative Murphy, you say you would continue to support the Affordable Care Act, but what would you support changing in it? How would you improve it?
Well, I think the big part when you talk about the Affordable Care Act is, number one, there's 8.1 million Americans that have access to health insurance today that didn't a year ago. So what we need to do is improve the program, and I think by improving the program there's a number of things. One, making sure that you make it more accessible on the internet so they don't have the problems they had a year ago when it first started up. Secondly, we need to create incentives for the states that haven't taken Medicaid expansion, like Wisconsin, because of the indigent care. But the most important part is states that have adopted the Affordable Care Act and have done Medicaid expansion, the cost of health care is rising slower in those states than the states that haven't, like Wisconsin. Plus you have hospitals that are taking indigent care in those states that are not getting any form of reimbursement today. So I think there's definitely some areas where we can improve the Affordable Care Act, and that's what we need to do. But when you repeal the Affordable Care Act, you're saying that you have lifetime limits that can come back. Along with that, if you repeal the Affordable Care Act, children can't go to college and have their parents have their health insurance cover them. There's 5 or 6 huge provisions that are eliminated if you repeal the Affordable Care Act. So I would not repeal it. I would work to improve it and make it better.
So I see the two of you working together on improving this.
Yeah, potentially. That could happen.
All right.
Well, except for both of us are not going to be in Congress, I don't think, at the same time. So, I don't know. In fact,
you get each other's cell phone numbers and...
James. We have questions from the audience now. We have a couple questions. Timothy and Evan are both asking about climate change. And specifically, what is Congress's role in combating climate change, and what should the next step be? And I believe this question goes to Representative Murphy.
I think it starts with me this time, yeah.
What's Congress's role, and what should the next step be in combating climate change?
I think this is a very good question. I'll just tell you that, first of all, I believe climate change is real. I believe that some of it is man-made, and we need to address those issues. So I think one of the things that we have to focus on is look at what Iowa's done here in this state. We created the Iowa Power Fund that ended up creating wind energy. We had an biorefinery plant built in Esterville, Iowa. Along with that, it caused a huge explosion in ethanol and soy diesel. Now we're moving into solar as well. If we want to reduce our carbon footprint, the part we have to do is continue to do what we're doing in Iowa and spread it to all 49 states. 25% of our energy in this state is done from a renewable standard. But more importantly, besides that, it's created 85,000 jobs within the renewable energy market here in the state of Iowa. That's what we need to do, make it about jobs and putting people to work, and these are high-quality jobs. But along with that, we have to look at all the options on the table. So I'm willing to look at anything that helps reduce our carbon footprint and work for compromise between parties.
Mr. Blum, does Congress have a role? What should it be?
I believe in climate change as well. Our climate is always changing. This planet's around 4.5 billion years old. And so how many years of a trend of change becomes a trend, for example? The last 18 years, the planet has not warmed. It has not warmed. And even the scientists do not understand why it hasn't. I remember in the mid-70s, we were going to go into an ice age. And I remember talking about spreading coal dust on the poles to absorb the sun's heat because it was a coming ice age. So they've used fear tactics. to try to scare us into these types of programs as far as the EPA goes, as far as cap and trade goes. And I think as scientists would even agree they don't quite understand, obviously, how the planet can heal itself. There's a single-cell microorganism called Prochlorococcus. It was founded in the Sargasso Sea 30 years ago. It's a carbon sink. It eats 40% of the carbon dioxide on the planet and produces over half of the oxygen on the planet. Scientists did not know it existed 30 years ago. So I think that could be part of the reason the temperatures haven't increased in the last 18 years. We do not know exactly how this very complex ecosystem of the planet operates and how it can heal itself. But we do need to be environmentally friendly in what we do. We just can't have it costing us jobs with this fragile economy that we have.
Another question from the audience tonight from Jason from Piasta. This is to you, Mr. Blum. How will you help military veterans and the VA medical centers?
Yes, I think my father was a veteran of World War II. My brother is a veteran, 3 tours of duty in Vietnam. I think our military veterans are our nation's finest without a doubt, and I think we owe them a large debt of gratitude when they come back. As far as the VA system, I think our veterans, and I've talked to many of them over the last 18 months, I think we should be able to give them a choice. Either they can go to the VA system, or we can give them a voucher or pay for them going to the private sector system, whichever they choose, because I do once again think that they deserve it for putting their life on the line in guaranteeing our freedoms in this country.
Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Bruce. I think this is a very important issue because the VA is not performing as well as it should. We need to make sure that they get the services and also to have the focus on making sure that those that come back with post-traumatic stress disorder get the help they need. And actually what's being done in the VA is something that can be one of our cures for Medicare. VA is able to negotiate as a group for all veterans across the country, yet they save 40% more than what people save on Medicare. We need to make sure that what we're doing right with the VA, we're doing right for Medicare as well. So I think there's a lot of solutions we can find, but quite frankly, we need to make sure that we continue our commitment to veterans. They're putting their life on the line for this country. We need to make sure that we provide the services. When I was Speaker of the House, we made sure that we actually dedicated a revenue source for the Veterans Trust Fund by doing veterans lottery tickets. Along with that, the Department of Defense asked us to do 10 steps. We did those 10 steps that they wanted in legislation in 2 months. Ray Zirkelbach, who was the state representative from Jones County, got those things done. We need to make sure that when they need something done that we act quickly.
Many of the nation's roads and bridges are in terrible shape, and the American Council of Engineering Companies says that it'll take at least $16 billion in additional revenue basically just to maintain the systems we have now. Where's the revenue going to come from? Raising the gas tax, or do we need to find some alternatives such as mileage taxes, or are there other creative remedies to provide the revenue states and the federal government need to address roads and bridges? And this question, I believe, goes to Mr. Blum.
I believe the federal gas tax is 18.4 cents currently per gallon of unleaded gas, slightly higher, 24 cents maybe for diesel, and I don't think it's been raised in maybe 20 years. So we have the inflation effect, first of all, and secondly, cars are getting better miles per gallon, which is a good thing, but they're driving the same number of miles on fewer gallons of gas. So this trust fund for road repairs is underfunded, there's no doubt. At the same time, I'm very cognizant of the middle class and costs and prices rising, and their incomes being down. And I don't know if now is the time where we want to increase a gallon of gas for the middle class. However, we do need to repair our roads and bridges. So I would say let's go somewhere else in the budget, like let's cut out corporate welfare, let's cut out crony capitalism, let's cut out the billions we give ExxonMobil and put that to helping build our roads and bridges and maintaining them.
Representative Murphy. Thank you, James. The big part I'll just say is this. If we want to put Americans back to work, this is the way you do it. And the problem we have with the current Congress is they haven't done a 6 or 7 year bill like they've done with Ice-T in the past. One of the things that we need to do, instead of having a 6-year or 12-month or 6-month or 12-month continuing resolution, we need to have a 6 or 7 year plan. Contractors are not going to go out and buy new equipment, cranes and bulldozers, unless they know that there's a long-term funding source that they can make sure that they can do that. And we need to address aging infrastructure.
I'm Christopher
The best way to put
Columbus.
Americans to work in this state is by addressing, there's 300 unsewered communities out of the 900 communities in the state of Iowa. You increase the value of those communities by making sure that they have proper sewer, and make sure that we address aging infrastructure in the larger communities like Waterloo, Cedar Rapids, Dubuque, and Marshalltown. So I think there's a number of things that we can do. And I think if we're going to do this, we shouldn't be doing it on the backs of the middle class when it comes to the gas tax. We should be looking at oil corporations that are still having record profits and put an excise tax on them that goes strictly towards roads and infrastructure. And this was something that actually came up that was a Republican idea in the Iowa legislature this year.
There you go.
I heard the word oil come in here. What do you support as a means of eliminating the U.S. dependence? I forgot about my microphone. The U.S. dependence on foreign oil. I mean, there are many options that we have today, from electric cars, natural gas, more solar and wind energy. What are you suggesting? This goes to Representative Murphy, I believe.
Well, Bruce, that's a good question. I don't think there's a clear answer for what that revenue is going to be. But quite frankly, it is an issue that's coming up. And quite frankly, it is something that we're going to have to study long term and see what solutions we can have to find alternative revenues. But if we are going to address oil, the big part is we need to look at what we've done in Iowa. You look at ethanol. You have ethanol plants throughout this whole state. You have soy diesel plants. We reduced our dependence on foreign oil with what this state's done over the last 8 or 10 years. And that's what we need to do throughout the country. Find ways that we can find renewable energy where we can make sure that we're actually cutting down, as we continue to conserve, also cut down on our dependence on foreign oil. Because a lot of our problems in the Middle East, I think, would be resolved if we didn't have to use Middle East oil.
Mr. Blum?
I'm a huge supporter of the RFS standard staying where it's at, and the ethanol industry as well. And as a business person, I understand it takes a while to get an infrastructure built, particularly for a new product. There is no way ExxonMobil or any of the big oil companies were going to allow the fledgling ethanol industry in Iowa to build the infrastructure required to sustain that product. So that is now happening, and I'm behind that 100%. The Iowa Farm Bureau endorsed our candidacy. And ethanol is obviously good for Iowa. It's good for eastern Iowa. It's good for farmers. It's renewable. It's clean. And it's one piece of the puzzle. And I'm an all-of-the-above guy. I think energy costs, we need to explore every energy source that we can. And the second biggest cost of the manufacturers is energy. And I've talked to some manufacturers like BPS out in Marshalltown, meatpacking plant, 2,000 employees. Their energy bills are over $100,000 a month. So anything we can do to continue to moderate or bring down energy bills, I actually believe we can bring back some of our manufacturing from China back to the United States of America if we reduce our regulations and make sure that energy is reasonably priced.
Now, Representative Murphy, you oppose the Keystone Pipeline. Why?
Because it runs over the largest aquifer in North America, over the state of Nebraska. Plus, along with that, this is not oil that's going to be sold in the United States. It's going to be sold abroad. So quite frankly, that's something that I oppose because of the environmental issues. I would just like to add, though, too, I'm opposed to the administration's proposal on the RFS. I support the renewable fuel standard because I do think it's important for us to keep that. But along with that, I think, quite frankly, we need to look at what Iowa's doing and expand that throughout the country, and not look like one size fits all, where we shoot a pipeline across the state that creates thousands of jobs that are short term, but then what we're creating is something that is used to make money abroad and not helping Americans.
What's your position?
I am for the Keystone Pipeline, and Pat talked about shovel-ready jobs. There's shovel-ready jobs ready to go. You bring up a good point, though, and I agree with it. If I was negotiating the deal or in Congress, would want to make sure that a certain percentage of that oil stayed in this country as opposed to it all being exported. And as long as we're talking about clean energy resources and the environment, the EPA, I have named them now the Employment Prevention Agency, because there's not a non-retail business I haven't spoken to in 18 months or a farmer that doesn't have an example of overreach by the EPA. We all want clean water. We all want clean air. And as long as that agency stays within the right-of-way lines, if you will, we're okay with that. We can adapt. But clearly, they're outside the right-of-way lines, and they're hurting our economy, and they're hurting eastern Iowa's middle-class families.
So you would abolish the EPA?
No, I wouldn't abolish them, but I'd be in favor of a 5-year moratorium on any new regulations. This administration has set a record for regulations, and every regulation has a cost to it. And then when we're paying to adapt to regulations, we're not hiring Americans to work.
Quickly, your opinion on the regulatory effects of the EPA.
Well, I think the important part is when you work with federal agencies, they're working right now with the DNR, but I think more importantly, we need to make sure that we keep focus on what we've done in Iowa, and this is a good example. We've done soil conservation and water quality programs in the Iowa legislature. We've worked specifically with farmers to get them to do conservation practices, and that's the best way to get this done. It shouldn't be a hammer approach. We should work with farmers to teach them the best conservation practices so it keeps their soil,